Farming has been at the heart of our lives for generations. But to the climate change advocates, suddenly it's a threat.
A lot of people have no clue that agriculture contributes about 33% of all the emissions of the world. You just can't continue to both warm the planet while also expecting to feed it. Doesn't work.
One thing John Kerry didn't mention was that farming and agriculture contributes 100% of the food that we need to eat. So that's a little kind of an important detail that he ought to have mentioned. And I think what we're dealing with here is actually a global war on agriculture. I believe they are demolishing our food infrastructure, partly to cause a crisis, right? And I guarantee you, mark my words, we're going to be in a food crisis, and they're going to say it's climate change.
I wouldn't say it's about saving the planet, no. I would say it's about land grab and about profiteering and corporatization of our food sector.
It's basically a pharmaceutical industry taking over the food supply. If I can switch everybody from real food to pharma food, then 100% of the agriculture industry can go through my publicly traded stocks, and I have complete control. So the idea is we get rid of farmers, we kill any naturally grown food, and we engineer food in manufacturing plants and laboratories. But I assure you that those guys are not eating this.
Bill Gates is one of the familiar corporate faces, and he's investing heavily in the food revolution under the guise of avoiding climate disaster.
Cows alone account for about 6% of global emissions. So we need to change cows.
And while he talks up the perceived problem, Gates is pouring money into the supposed solution: artificial meat and genetically modified crops. Crucially, anything that is invented or altered can be patented.
The core of his agenda is he wants to do in agriculture and pharmaceuticals, by the way, what he did in the computer world. True power, massive, incalculable wealth comes from owning intellectual property and then monopolizing it. They want to make it so that every single organism that is used for food is ultimately under their control, either through the 3D printing or through this genetic manipulation. So we're moving now very rapidly toward this totally centralized food system where a tiny handful of corporate interests in bed with totalitarian government will dominate the food supply so that there is only a giant public-private partnership with total control of all food, all energy, and I believe water will be next.
While the global machinations continue, thousands of farmers fear for their livelihoods. And the new UK government's first budget has multiplied those fears. By reducing relief on inheritance tax, they're penalising those who would want to pass their farms to sons or daughters. The National Farmers Union described it as
a disastrous budget
for family farms that would
snatch away the next generation's ability to carry on producing British food and see farmers forced to sell land to pay the tax.
For Kelly Seaton, concern goes well beyond her family farm in Cheshire.
It makes me feel incredibly sad that the dairy and meat industry is so vilified. You will never find anything as nutritionally complete as milk and meat. The food that is going to replace milk, meat, and all of the other products that we produce in this country is going to be very nutritionally lacking. They will starve us from nutrients, and then the pharmaceutical companies will probably pick up the slack on that, all of which create a profiteering circle.
No Farmers, No Food was set up to campaign against untenable net zero and climate change policies. Farmers, says Kelly, are being dealt a deeply unfair hand.
When cows are blamed for climate change, it does make you question everything. And I think this is where a lot of farmers are waking up to the fact that there's a lot of lies being told to us. The problem with the current carbon system is that a lot of big corporations are offsetting their carbon. So most dairy producers now especially, but other farmers as well, are having to record their carbon footprint on systems that aren't fit for purpose. They are woo-woo figures pulled from the sky, quite frankly, and then the big corporations are using that data to offset their carbon so that they can look better again, at the same time as beating us with a stick and saying that we're the ones killing the planet with these girls.
The methane emitted by cows' digestive system is part of the argument against them, but Kelly says that's just hot air.
The grass that they eat would produce the same amount of methane whether they ate it or not. OK, they do speed that up, but the other thing they give us is this, muck, which we put on the fields to fertilise the fields and reduces our reliance on buying in fertiliser. 200
miles to the south, Ed Rhodes farms 188 acres of Devon countryside. He's not part of the No Farmers, No Food movement, but agrees that the whole narrative on cows and climate change is wrong.
As farmers, we recycle carbon all the time. That's what we do. You could almost define farmers as carbon recyclers. We're an organic beef, sheep and vegetable farm. We run a fairly traditional system of rotational farming. We'll have a field which would be growing a brassica crop for 1 year, a non-brassica crop for another year, such as broad beans or sweet corn, and then we have a break for that field, so it goes into a predominantly grass and clover mix. That allows the soil to recover from the work that we've done with it while we've had the vegetables growing. It also allows things like the clover to put nitrogen back into the soil. So the livestock are absolutely essential for grazing that grassland. We also mow it so that the hay, the silage that we take from those fields are fed to the cattle in the winter. The bale I'm sitting on, the bedding that they're standing on, is all mown from very rushy areas on our farm. The animals then dung onto that. We compost that. That gets spread onto the land primarily where we're growing the vegetables to put the fertility in, and that's what then produces our crops. If you remove livestock from the system, you have no system.
Farmers like Ed Rhodes work with knowledge and passion, but still have to comply with a labyrinth of government rules and regulations, including carbon monitoring. And now land itself is under threat. Corporations such as British Airways are buying farms to plant trees for carbon offsets, while other areas are being declared sites of special scientific interest, restricting or even preventing use for crops and livestock. And then there's the United Nations SDGs.
Goal 15. Protect, restore and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems.
Consequently, rewilding programmes are impacting farmland across the world. In the UK, for example, the government is planning to set apart 1,200 square miles for wildlife habitat by 2042. That's an area almost as large as Cornwall. And in America, dams are being removed and river courses reopened, disrupting water supplies for crops. Goal 13 states,
take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts.
As a result, the Dutch government plans to close 3,000 farms to meet EU emissions targets, drawing widespread protests. And in Denmark, farmers face paying £80 for every cow they own in a world-first tax on meat.
Goal 7. Ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all.
One result: cultivated land is disappearing under vast solar parks. How does this square with the UN's biodiversity goals or even ending hunger? Maybe they're questions for Ed Miliband, the UK's Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. He's cleared the way for a huge solar park on prime farmland in East Anglia, an area big enough to site 1,745 football pitches.
It's a crime to take food productive land out for solar panels, which are unrecyclable, potentially not that productive going forward, and not feed the planet. It is absolutely catastrophic. We've gone from being 78% self-sufficient in 1984 to now less than 60% self-sufficient. I think it's about 54%, which I think is set to fall even further this year.
On top of all that, British farmers are being paid not to produce food under schemes like the Sustainable Farming Incentive. Kelly Seaton understands that many farmers accept the money to balance their books, but has this warning.
When you look at how many farms are selling up, how many arable farms are struggling, we're walking into food shortages, and I think we're going to end up eating more processed food, maybe lab-grown meat, and I think that's part of the plan.
The squeeze on farming is self-evident. Our supply of natural food is under very real threat, just as the WEF predicted. Worse than that, Catherine Austin Fitz says that with programmable currency, you wouldn't have a choice.
No one in their right mind would ever eat this stuff. But the reality is, once they have control of your transactions, they can dictate what food you can and cannot buy. If they want you to buy pizza made with insect-based flour, that's what you're going to get.
There's an energy crisis. Even though there is an abundance of energy, there's a food crisis, even though there's plenty of food to feed the world. There's a water crisis, even though 70% of the Earth's surface is covered with it. There's an air crisis where CO2 is declared the enemy of mankind, even though it's necessary for life to exist on Earth. There's a resource crisis, even though there are abundant resources to support everyone. What's with us here, you know? Who created all these crises? They did it. Just as clear as the nose on my face. It's all been a sham. All the essential things of life, they've been declared to be scarce, because things that are scarce you can control.
The architects of such globalist trajectories, all the Kissingers, Rockefellers, Schwabs, Carneys, Strongs, Carstens, are held out as great intellects. But they are nothing of the sort. We know, both in theory and in practice, that centralization causes nothing but misery, because it destroys the mechanisms of error correction, leading to doubling down on flawed policies.
And yet the creed of global dominance continues apace. Through the WHO's so-called pandemic agreement, its One Health initiative, and ultimately the United Nations Agenda 2030. From medical diktats to gender and racial politics to climate change, the indoctrination runs deep.